I'm going to talk some more about biochemical activities. Last week I was mentioning about what appears to be types of people, and then of course gave you the task, those who cared to see what you could come up with on your own, insofar as observing how the wiring possibilities within people could give you some indication as to why some people seem to talk abrasive and in a parallel fashion seem to stand in a certain way, how certain people seem to have a turn of their head and a certain style of dress, and you talk to them and find out that they have a predictable political leaning. You find out there are others that their whole speech seems to be coming from some particular boiling place in the blue circuit that runs right to the tongue and makes it go. A little bit wider, can you perceive that certain activities, which includes all activities, that you would find certain activities connected to their participants wired biochemical change possibilities, the hobbies, the profession, the kinds of communities in which they seem to live, both figuratively and literally. If you use the kind of special head theorems, that is, that there is a psychology of man that in some way, that if it is not totally separate from the body and all the mundane activities, that it is indeed unusual enough to warrant special attention, special excuses, special descriptions, and in so doing, up until now, humanity at best uses the idea, if we say at best, beyond the kind of idea of some kind of spiritual predetermination, if you're into the area that would appear to be contemporary psychology, psychological explanations, is then they would attempt to describe why a particular individual became an accountant as opposed to a taxi driver, why someone attempted to become an author as opposed to a bricklayer, which his father was, why another son or daughter did not pursue the military when all their background was in military service to their country. Then they can take what appears to be psychological explanations, say the military. A family has two sons, one goes into the military and even appears to be a spitting image of his old man, the other one becomes a hairdresser. No offense to hairdressers. He becomes something less than a military man. And if you could get the family into family therapy or question them, a psychologist would come up with something on this basis. Here is a fair shot if some of you don't know what I'm about to say already, because you can guess. The old man was so overbearing that apparently the second son that I mentioned just did not, for some reason, have the psychological wherewithal, the strength to put up with the kind of military attitudes that the old man attempted to impress even upon the children when they were in kindergarten. One of them seemed to take to it, the other one seemed to immediately rebel. The more he rebelled, the more the old man hollered, you know, you're going to disgrace the whole family. No son of mine is going to be anything less than a real man. You're going to play hard, you're going to get hurt, you're going to get out there and get dirty. And the kid wants to stay inside and cut out paper dolls. Then the psychologist would say, all right, it becomes some kind of self-fueling psychological circle. The explanation, if you stop there, is as good as any. And it sounds a lot more contemporary to people in our day and place than it would to say, all right, the gods pick out some people to fight wars and some people to stay home and to cut hair. Both explanations are all right. And nobody can argue with the first one. You just have to be yellow circuit oriented enough and say, well, religion's just a bunch of crap and it can't be proven. So what? To say God picked out somebody to be soldiers, we gotta have soldiers, and some people, he said, we need men to do things that take a little more skill, dexterity, a little feeling to it. The psychological explanation to line-level consciousness of most people that would hear me say this, the psychological explanation is that which sounds as though it is based upon valid observations, the experience over the last 50 or 60 years of psychology. It is a biochemical situation. Everything that someone apparently is wired up to be attracted to can be seen on the basis that it is a biochemical condition. It is the very place that psychology has been choking on for 20 or 30 years, which is not bad in life's ordinary span of activities, but they always get back to the environment versus heredity. That how can you explain two sons, 10 months apart in age, grew up under the same environment, and one of them walks in the footsteps, looks like the father, took to the military life. The other one, all you have to do is look at him, not just his profession, you just look at him. And you would be hard-pressed to imagine anyone more diametrically opposed in the great binary world to a life of military service than this dude. So how do you explain that? By and large, up until about right now, as I was just saying, the explanation has always been psychological. That is, there was some quirk somewhere. The old man, the way in which he treated the kids was not as even-handed as first observation might infer. The one son that was 10 months older had 10 months to get accustomed to it. The younger son always felt as though, even though you may chuckle that 10 months doesn't mean that much, 10 months can mean a lot. I mean, it's been proven statistically that younger siblings, just historically, have this trouble trying to cope, trying to compete with an older brother or perhaps sister. The world is not yet ready to see that it's all a matter, given those two choices again, it is all a matter of genetics as opposed to environment. It's all a matter of genetics if you're only given those two choices, which is all the human mind can come up with now. But rather than just saying genetics, it is the biochemical effect, the way the person is wired up. And wired up, there are many things that I've yet to ever go into, and I may never, because it's not a class in physiology. It's hormones, all sorts of things. I just keep giving you a shortcut description because you can see it enough. You can find it in you. You can feel the changes. Enough of you, now I can speak of it, and it's beyond any sort of theory, that enough of you, at least on one or two occasions, have now felt. You've been feeling it all your life, but now you have some way in which to map it and some way in which to look at it, that things happen and you feel. It's no secret. It's not a mystical experience. It's what you've been doing all your life. Is right now I felt, and when somebody came in and said, look, I know I told you that I would go fishing with you tomorrow, or I'd take you somewhere. I can't do it. You know, oh, not the end of the world, but it's on such an everyday level that many of you have had an experience now of being able to observe that this is not some kind of psychological disappointment. It is not simply me going away after the person leaves and says, well, we'll try to do it next week. And they leave, and your partner begins to talk about how people let you down. I mean, you try to get along in the world. You would not have done that to that person. When you tell somebody you'll do something, it would be a matter literally of life or death before you would break your word, and in such a cavalier manner, they just came by and said, well, I'm sorry, I can't do it. See you later. And they don't even notice the way in which they hurt you. Not just that they didn't do what they said, but the attitude. You could sit there, you and your partner, and weave a very acceptable psychological tale as to why I now feel somewhat disappointed. I mean, I was feeling pretty good. I got up early. I was expecting him or her to come pick me up. We were going out there and do this particular thing. I dressed for the occasion. I'd been up early, got in a quick run, And I was all set to go, and now I feel as though somebody's pulled the plug out of my tub. It is taken as being a psychological situation because that is where the partner is. That's where the voices are. They're not down in my red or blue circuit. So the voices talk about, how could somebody do this to me? How could people let me down? How could I have such reasonable plans and expectations to see them come to naught yet again? But now some of you, as I repeat one more time, at least any of you feel as though you're missing something. It's not a mystical experience. It's what's always been going on, but you have been looking in the wrong place. You've been looking with the wrong map. This is not simply some kind of special head condition. It is all a matter of molecular change. I had already been making plans, which I'll get into in a minute, plans in biochemical change. But here it was, I had a plan. I, in some way, myself had gotten out of just a routine biochemical condition. The way I was feeling today is not the way I would feel on ordinary Saturday mornings. As a matter of fact, most Saturday mornings I'd be sleeping late. I was up early, I was enthused, but forget the head theorems. There were biochemical reactions in me that were not ordinarily native to this time on Saturday morning for yours truly. And I was in this condition somewhat off of my ordinary Saturday morning media. I was tilted. Psychologically, it would be called filled with expectations, hopes, plans for the fun coming. The person knocks on the door, comes in and says, hey, something came up, I can't make it. We're back as I must for a while. Remind you, the fact that he says, or the person says, something came up, I can't make it, none of that happens until the person's, yeah, the sound waves go through the ear, goes through the most mechanical process imaginable, makes your eardrum rattle around, creates a molecular change in the brain that translate these sounds. That they are not going with you to do what you had been primed up molecularly to do, and now there is a change in you chemically. And you can talk about psychological letdowns, you can talk about the fragility of interpersonal relationships, you can talk about it all you want to. But until that person said, until the sound waves went through the air, until they got in your ear, until you looked and you saw they're not smiling, this is not a joke, till your senses, the same senses that you've got in common with dogs and cats and possums, until those senses took in the sights and the sounds, your biochemical condition was that of, then the internal biochemical condition shifted. Oh, well, okay, all right, I understand. Rats. The yellow circuit and the partner can talk all they want to. It was a biochemical, it was a molecular occurrence, and that's it. After that, part of what life is here for, and part of the ways in which life serves an exceptional kind of growth is that it does have a yellow circuit to talk about this. It does have a yellow circuit that in a sense takes credit, takes responsibility, then directs blame. That is part of the great CDE dance. The dance occurs inside each individual. People continue to ask me to say something again about spatial head theorems, so perhaps I'll weave it in and out tonight. That's a part of what I meant. Some of you keep seeing me back, you won't hear more about it, you think you missed something. It is. It's not some kind of folly. It's not a mistake. It's a part of the yellow circuit at work. It's a part of what keeps it going and makes it capable of inventing a camera, weaving a suit, coming up with hairspray, computers. For it to take itself as being in some way, if not separate from the rest of this, at least unusual to the point that it deserves special treatment, that the rules that apply to the spleen do not apply to this. Do not call me spleen brain. Well, Have any of you considered this? The pleasing effects of ordinary attempts at self-improvement. Now, I've run through some of these examples, and if some of you had been listening through the ears of your own partner, you would have thought in the past, even with my caveat, that I was attacking self-improvement by me pointing out that people can say I'm going to improve myself, and in what would approach an objective sense, if we went in beyond a binary world, there is no such thing. But there is the pleasing attempt at the ordinary level at self-improvement. Why? Well, I'd like to lose weight. I'd feel better. But you know what people mean by feel better nowadays, unless they were just obese and can't stand up. Feel better is I will look sexier, I will look neater, I can wear contemporary fashion. Plus the doctor said I should lose a few pounds. I'm going to take up jogging. Help the old heart. I'm going back to school. I'm going to take a class in etiquette. I'm going to take a Sunday classes in painting. All of that amounts to one thing for the ordinary people. With all of us at the ordinary level, it creates a pleasing to you, a pleasing biochemical change. To run, to go in and learn, you paint a little. And see, psychologically, you could explain this on that level. All right, how do you like, since you've taken up art classes, you're over there at that community college every Saturday, how do you like it? I really like it. At first I didn't think I could paint, but the instructor has come around several times in the last month since I've been there and pointed out that I seem to have, as she put it, a real touch. All right, so psychologically you say, all right, this person, they're just feeding their ego, I think is what it's called. You know, like that is some kind of imaginary something. Of course, all of you know what that has meant, what ordinary people mean by it. Well, they would say that's their imagination. I've seen what he calls painting and drawing. You know, he cannot paint. As far as I can tell, he got no talent. And if somebody's coming around, an instructor over there, telling him that he's got a real touch, and they're just trying to make him feel good. They're trying to get his money, or the teacher just wants to keep a job, she needs students over there, who knows what. And for the person to believe it, you know, something's short somewhere. They should know that they do not have any talent in this. In other words, they would say this is some kind of psychological game, either self-induced or through the cooperation of other participants. That it's imaginary. It's just an illusion. It's just their ego wanting to believe, hey, since I've taken up running, I feel a lot better. And the person still chain smokes, they're still 20 pounds overweight, but they're out every other day running, huffing, puffing, walk a while, run a while, and they say, I feel better. Another person can dismiss it like this is their imagination. They haven't changed their diet, they don't do it regularly enough. Or somebody can say, I've gone back to school, and I'm going to take up the study of medicine. I'm going back into undergraduate work, and we'll start at the bottom. And somebody that knows them say, the person is 48 years old. They're not going to get into med school. They're an idiot. And they're beginning to get senile, even at that age. You miss the point. You miss the point when you do something. You take up something, and you may take it up like the whole world's full of this. We're all victim of this. I think I'll try this. You take it up, you do it 2 or 3 weeks, and that's the end of it. It can be described psychologically. It can be described another way. When you started out, either that or what I'm going to get into, plans created a molecular shift in you that was pleasurable. But it was very short-lived. At that level, all attempts, all ordinary attempts at self-improvement, whether it is I'm going back to my forefathers' religion, whether I'm going to lose weight, I'm going to have a nose job, hair transplants, I'm going back to school, I'm going to buy a new Corvette. Should I have lumped that under ordinary attempts at self-improvement? Yeah. All of it is based upon a pleasurable shift in the biochemistry of the person. And even though from an outside observation, the claim of this other person that I am doing this to improve myself, although it may be open to obvious attack by others that it's your imagination or you'll never do it or you're not doing it, it's not creating the benefits you claim you're getting, that's just as mechanical on their part as can be, because it is creating inside that person a biochemical shift, and it's going under the term as attempted self-improvement. But to that degree, it is self-improvement. They feel better molecularly. Forget anything else. And you don't have to look far. You got you. How about contrary? How about the one I used to dig out periodically? I was bringing up another point at the time some years back about me taking someone who had mystical visions, a good first-class mystic of some kind, that thought God's talked to him. And I guess some of you remember this. I used it on several occasions. And I point I could take this good man of the gods, and you can almost depend on the fact that if I said, how many miles a day do you run? You could almost count on it being none. Yeah, none. If, for some reason, I could induce this man, through whatever trickery, that you'll have, I'm an older mystic than you, I know about these things, if you'll start running 3 miles a day, first thing in the morning, every day without fail, it'll have a drastic, almost immediate effect upon your spiritual life. And of course, what would happen is the gods would quit talking to the person, and assuming that I could trick them into starting out, within a few days, the person would be non-running. The point is, they are not wired up to find that profitable, the position that they're already filling in life. For me to have a mystic go run is going against his wiring, or her wiring. Between that and what I was pointing out about ordinary attempts at self-improvement, you can find the whole range of people taking up short-lived attempts. You can find people saying, I have decided, I just got through reading an article about the bad benefits of eating red meat. I'm going to stop it, probably starting tomorrow. I am. I've read too much about it. That may be the last you hear of it, or it may pop back up. A month later, the person may say it. When I had the task several weeks ago, you recall, of asking you to write down what would be a possible 10-year plan, something that would be possible for you. Can we turn the heat off? Several of you made a note back to me just on the basis that you found it interesting as you were sitting trying to write out the 10-year plan. You know, I remind you, I said it's not something, I was not about to say everybody do it. And it didn't have to be anything that you sat there and believed, yeah, there's some chance of me doing this. It wasn't that, it was just, it is theoretically possible. I've got the arms, the legs, the average intelligence, the right kind of mass, weight, the background that I theoretically, I could do this. Several of you just dropped me a little note saying that you found it very interesting, whether you finished it or not, of just what seemed to be going on with trying to wrestle with the plan of it. All right, the biochemical change. Let me jump off one block over before we press on. Can you see that it could be said? It could be said that the red and blue circuits are the most commonly affected via biochemical change. Now, I could take off and comment and preach a while on that. Maybe some of you would get something out of it, but I was going somewhere else tonight. But it could be said, just from observing, that the most common areas in the ordinary organism that are biochemically affected, whether it appears that the person themselves are trying to through self-improvement, or whether outside circumstances seem to be having some kind of impact on them, that apparently, there's one way you could look at it and even describe it, that it's the red and blue circuits that are most commonly affected. Remember, I didn't say that was true. But it could be noted. You could observe it, and I could talk about it in that way. But how about this? It is possible to have a biochemical change in the organism through thinking of action rather than action itself. That is, plans. And of course, you cannot have plans as we speak of plans, even the illusion of plans, without the yellow circuit. And so the heading of this paragraph should be plans, parentheses, yellow circuit, into parentheses, and biochemical change, colon. Not like in colon brain. When I noted that it could be said that the red and blue circuits would apparently, from one view, be the areas most commonly, most directly affected biochemically, then we're talking about everything that is at the basis of keeping the organism just alive in the ordinary sense, of feeding its hunger, quenching its thirst, having enough sexual activity to regenerate the race, keeping warm, keeping cool. But you can get and experience biochemical change not just from action, and not just from the action that's apparently done to you, but through that which is unique to man on this level, the ability to, quote, think. To think of acting. That is, plans. Now, this is nothing mystical because everyone knows this and they don't know it, and nobody uses it. But it is very common. I hadn't thought to put figures on it before, but I'll go ahead since nobody can call my bluff. It's possible for the ordinary human to get a large percentage of its pleasurable biochemical changes, not through action, but through thinking of action, that is, through planning. Who else but man, as far as you know, can sit down, prop his feet up on a table, have a tab, look out the window, and experience biochemical changes while sitting there motionless? Everyone does this to some degree. And now that I've said it, I still stand by that in many cases and many people, a large percentage of what seems to be that organism's, just talking about mechanically, not anything willfully if they're aware of. But if you could look in and you had some way that you could see it, that it was continually attempting to affect its biochemical condition in a way that seemed, we're just calling it pleasurable. I'm not going to argue with the term since I'm using it. It's just a word. That it can do it through planning. But ordinarily it goes on very mechanically. It's just oftentimes, or most commonly referred to as daydreams. I just sit, I don't have anything particular to do. I'm not real bored, but I just don't have much to do. So you sit there and light up a pipe, have a tab, look out the window, and there goes a new Corvette. And suddenly you begin to dream of, all right, if I sold my car, and I took a weekend job as a bartender down like that guy, and you start remembering somebody mentioned a job, and plus if I sold all my clothes to the Goodwill, you start planning, you're daydreaming that it is possible that I might could come up, if not a brand new Corvette, last year's model. And people don't ordinarily notice it. It creates a biochemical change that there you sit motionless. And the plans, and I'm being charitable, of course, in the way I described the example, but let's call it plans instead of just daydreams, creates a biochemical change that the person finds pleasurable. How many people in the world do you think have ever thought about this, or how many people have life ever told this to, that somebody can sit around and use this? Of course, now I've told you. Does that mean everybody's going to use it? Well, I don't know. Could you describe it a little more? I'm not sure I got it. What does the partner normally do? That's your daydream voices. What if you could force it into cooperation? I shouldn't always be rhetorical in these last few years we got together. You can make it. You can willfully plan. And of course, I'm not inferring this should be any kind of substitute for real action when it's called for. But you can willfully use what appears to be plans to create pleasurable, and not just in some illusionary sense, because this is real, this happens to people mechanically, to create pleasurable biochemical changes through simply planning. How about a few of you? I used to throw this out 2 or 3 years ago, and sometimes it'd get a chuckle and sometimes it'd get a stare from some of you. I think somebody just remembered it. Sometimes I used to make jokes, and sometimes apparently they directed toward me. I'd show up and I'd hand out some magazines I'd collected over the last few months, and for a while I had a stack of sailing magazines. 3 or 4 different magazines a month. And once I made a little joke, I said, these magazines are pretty expensive. Yachting used to be something like $20 a year when that was higher. I said, I've been subscribing now for 2 or 3 years, whatever it is I told you. I said, that's must be a $200 worth of magazines here. But that sure is a lot less than $220,000 for a 70-foot yacht. There's some of you, I used to point out the great benefits. The one thing, speaking somewhat facetiously, that nobody should really complain about the damn government is libraries. Because you don't even have to subscribe. You can go to the library and read the magazines free and just save hundreds of thousands of dollars. Go read every magazine, every review of the new Corvettes, read Consumer's Guide or wherever it is that attacks it, points out its flaws. And all it cost you was subway fare to the library. And you read about it. Read about it until you're sick of it. Well, I believe a few of you do remember that I used to make it like a joke. And I even said such as that. And some of you would laugh when I'd mention it. Why go to all the trouble to try and beg, borrow, go in debt for $200,000 for the kind of yacht that I would want to sail around the world? Plus, the damn trouble to get out there and sail around the world. It'd ruin your stereo. Within 2 or 3 months, you'd take along a good stereo, see what it'd ruin it. I mean, it's just a pain in the ass. But the magazines were so nice to look at. All the good color photographs of other people doing it. The good bargains in the used section. Magazine cost $20 a year. You read it through. And the joke was, as I put it sometimes, if you do that long enough, you'll finally get sick of it. Your subscriptions run out and you forget about it. I repeat again, that is not to say that if somebody has an interest, it's not to tell you not to do something. But you can get a pleasurable, everybody does it, but you need to see it. You can get a pleasurable biochemical change in yourself from planning. You don't have to decide beforehand, all right, I'm going to start subscribing to car magazines, and I'll make myself sick about reading them so that I won't buy a new Corvette. That's not the way to start it. But if you don't have the money, go ahead and start with that. Start with the plans. Start going out. Every time you feel the mood, go out and test drive one to another dealer that doesn't know you. Ask all the questions you can. Every time you see a new Corvette parked at a drive-in somewhere or 7-Eleven, stop and ask the guy, say, hey, I've been thinking about buying one. What do you think? Maybe you'll eventually buy one. But in the meantime, I'm talking about real plans, not suffering over it, of course, not letting your partner say, how come somebody like that guy, he's 20 years younger than me, how'd he get that? I bet his father's rich and gave it to him. None of that. It's got to be a positive, constructive, creative feeling plan that I feel I have an interest in this, I'm going to pursue it. Right now, I don't have the time, the energy, the money to get a boat and sail around the world, or I can't buy a brand new Corvette. But I feel so interested in it, I'm going to plan, and I'm going ahead and see what kind of biochemical change I can do willfully. I think I'm going to drop it. If I didn't bring it up for no reason at all. Some other things I thought about connected in general areas around biochemical change. I'll go back to my Southern Baptist approach and pull some things out of the air that have been happening with which everyone's familiar. How about, speaking of ordinary intellectuals, educators, the common attack by intellectuals of TV that's going to turn us into a country of idiots, of illiterates, that there is something wrong with it. All of you know as much about this as I do out in the ordinary world. Find anyone who passes for being an intellectual, who wants to be. And if you interview them long enough in the newspaper or People magazine, and their children come in the room and ask, what do you think about rearing children? If they give them enough space, they're going to come out and say, well, you know, this and that, and you got to love them. And one thing, we don't even have a TV in our house. Oh, well, we got one in the bedroom, and, you know, we watch great performances and night at, you know, the Metropolitan. But my children don't see anything unless it's on PBS. It's just across the board. Intellectuals, they're old enough to be called intellectuals, a complete denunciation of TV. All right, now forget the fact that there is nothing running ordinarily on TV that is very stimulating. Now, I'll grant you that. But how about what seems to be the almost intellectually passionate attack? How about this? Here is part of life's body. It's almost a kind of de-protective mode that's already been established. Let's assume these people who are 40 years old, let's assume that they did not grow up spending 5 or 6 hours a day watching Leave It to Beaver and Sky King and Howdy Doody. That's open to some question. Of course, that's not even the point. Forget the little laugh that got. That's not even the point. Let's assume they didn't. And that they spent their appropriate time in schools, then in universities, then in graduate schools. And to them, the mind is a beautiful thing. Reading the great books of the world, reading stimulating literature will give a person, if only you, the masses, would give it a chance, it will give something to you that watching 100 reruns of the A-Team will never give you. They're just sure of it. It's part of life's body. It's part of life's body that is already dealing with molecular change with which it, that is the individuals, which is simply part of life's body, with which it are familiar and which are proven that it works. What they're railing against, that is part of life's body, always going in a multitude of directions. Part of what it is railing against is a new molecular impact that is not proven. I mean, TV's been around now for 30 years, but it is not proven in the same sense that oral communication, oral instruction, the reading of the printed page, because the tube off of a TV set simply, forget the content for the moment, simply creates in a different way molecular changes in the viewer than it does the printed word. It absolutely does. That's a part of it, but also a part of it is the unfamiliarity of this impact, that the molecular changes, that the reading of the written word, the kind of traditional instruction of a teacher in a classroom is familiar. Insofar as what it should have done, it has proven that it did it, or it wouldn't have done it. It would not have survived. It would have never been created. But now is going into, some out in the world, life's already talking about through people, a new information age. And along with that, though, comes these at least partial cries of fear that we're going to turn out generations of illiterates. They're going to get all the information, not just watching cartoons, but they'll get information off that damn tube. Somebody, it's just going to be handed to them, they say. It's just going to be force-fed to them. And they won't have any sort of background into making the effort to intellectually try and wrestle with the material, to try and understand it. Oh, that sounds good. It sounds like it's valid. But you take it a step further, and it's a new molecular impact, and it is being resisted, as always happens, by another part of life's body that has been dealing with what seems to be information flowing of some kind in a molecular way that was not through that kind of electronic tube. That there is an absolute difference, it shouldn't be a secret to you, in picking up something and reading it, and to have the same information flashed on TV, to have someone tell it to you in person or in a classroom, and then to watch the same person even, but you watch them on that tube. There is a difference. Forget anything about some kind of psychological difference. There is a molecular difference. What it does to the viewer, what it does to the participant. And for them to say that TV watching is going to turn it into a generation not only of illiterates, but of passive people. It's just kids sitting there slack-jawed staring. It's not passive. There's no such thing as passive. It is bombarding you. You're no more passive doing that than you are reading a book. You're no more passive than you are someone's talking, and you're listening to some degree. Yeah. But it is a new molecular impact. Even though it's 30 or 40 years old, it is still new vis-a-vis what has gone on with the other areas of the transfer of communication and information. Someone was bringing up a while back the delight in the word oxymoron. Several of you, I've heard people play around with it trying to come up. I guess one of the better knowns is Army intelligence. Used to be, was always good for a laugh and being a prime example. Governmental thrift, I guess. How about all the things, if I don't bring them down to one word, or even a term, of oxymorons that are connected with this? Is anyone, well, you've never heard of it, but now let me ask you. I'll give you a few seconds, and you see if you can imagine one. A left-wing general. Think about it. Whether in this country, South America, Europe. When I was a general, of course, I'm saying a career man, a organism wired up to go into military service. And he's either just fulfilling his duties somewhat in private, or perhaps there is a coup and he comes to power, or he's within a circle that comes to power. The military is back in control somewhere. I want you to try and picture a liberal, a left-wing general. And since you have got to have a broken spoke somewhere, if you think you imagine one, now the question is that not interesting? Having nothing to do with politics, of course, is it not interesting that you cannot be wired up to do a thing that, using words in a legitimately logical, linear, binary fashion, it is not an oxymoron. It's not like saying the deafening silence and say, well, that's just a poetic oxymoron. You cannot take my term of a left-wing or a liberal general. There is no reason that those two won't fit, but there is no such creature. Apparently, there's got to be. Well, there certainly could be. Right? There could be. There could be a general somewhere, a career man that was a liberal in the ordinary sense, political and economic, political sense. I mean, they could. They don't have any laws against it. So it sounds, well, sure, I just can't remember ever seeing one. I've never heard of one, but sure, it's possible. And it's not. Because of wiring. Not because of political backgrounds, not because of the environment of any particular general or the environment of all generals. How about people in the arts? Music, painting. And this gets real sticky, so I probably won't go into it, but to varying degrees into the world of letters. But at least you get strangle. Take it as normally the hard arts, music, dance, painting, sculpture. Those kind of arts are not a yellow circuit endeavor. And yet, you can go to school and you can major in those arts. You can major in the history of those arts. You can major in the critique of those arts. You can get a job being a critic and describing the juxtaposition of the rough surfaces as they merge with a calliope of colors of a more smooth that seem to bring about a cohesiveness that has run throughout the primal level of this particular artist's work over the last 2 decades. And the artist hears that, and he goes, I couldn't have said it better. Because he can't say anything about it. It is not a... Well, when artists do, it is even funnier in a sense. Not in a critic, of course, not in any sarcastic sense, but in a sense, it is funnier than yellow circuit people, or those of a more yellow circuit inclination that would become professional critics of the arts. It's to hear an artist, and it happens that someone corners the artist. It just seems to be as though he's no way out, and he tries to comment on his art. Well, the reason I'm going to give this a fast glance because I don't think many of you are going to necessarily see something right now. But if I wanted to spend a little bit longer, I could make the arts through just ordinary examples, through the way that life has had civilizations treat the arts, is they infer that in some way it is not simply, or certainly not simply a yellow circuit activity, but it has something to do with the intellectual activities of man, the intellectual growth of civilization, that paintings do not only speak to our sense of style and balance and color, but here it is, whatever the painting, whether it's Rembrandt, somebody examining a skull, whether it's one of those old paintings of Jesus and prostitutes, or whether it's an expressionist abstract, there's continually, through life's body, groups of people being forced to speak about this as though it was involved to a large degree with intellectual activity. And it's not. Or trying to coax a description out of the artist, and they can't. How is it that you can stand up, pick up that saxophone, and as far as I can tell, I'm a fairly good music critic, he says, you can weave through improvisation hours of music, enough to entertain not only me, but people come out and pay money. How do you do it? God forbid the person tries to say, because it is not a yellow circuit activity. But part of what I was going to get at was it has always been accepted that in some way all of the arts, singing, all the practice I went through to develop my voice, the many years that I studied and starved painting until I was recognized of the message, what I was trying to convey, it would be an area that, if it were common knowledge, even to the people involved, if they were suddenly confronted with the fact that, back to the way I describe it sometimes, if we could make them tell the truth as it really is in another dimension, is how can you stand up there and play? I mean, you bring tears sometimes to people's eyes. You sell out everywhere you go. There's just sort of a, for those of you not that interested in music, you know, there's sort of a little background of the rhythm section playing. There's somewhat little points of references, but you get up there and you play that sax for hours, and as far as I can tell, you make up the song on the spot. I mean, at times it's as good as anything I've ever heard somebody sit down and sweat out blood to write, that you get up there and improvise it, and as far as I can tell, you're not stealing. You seem to be original to a certain degree, night after night. How do you do it? And if we go into another dimension, is when I say, make the guy tell the truth, he'd say, I got no goddamned idea in the world. None. Because that's it. It would be a variation of, all right, what are you going to say next? And then we'll get somewhere. How do you paint? I don't understand exactly some of this abstract expressionism. But you're well-renowned. I look at it and I even kind of like it, and I've tried to read descriptions of your work that just, they don't make much sense to me. And it looks as though you just grab paint and you just did something, but you get through it most of the time. The stuff I've seen of yours, I like it enough. If I could afford it, I'd probably buy it. And I don't know what the hell it means. How do you come up with the ideas? Now forget the brochures at his showing of some critic describing the juxtaposition of the color and the tensile, the unspoken battle between the tensile strength of the color. The guys say, you got me. You know, it's what I do. I pick up paints and I do this, and sometimes they come out and sometimes they don't. I don't know. That, you understand, is not possible, but if it were, that can't be allowed. Then it'd just be one step. You'd start asking psychiatrists or priests or rabbis, what is it you actually do? I'm a psychiatrist. I'm a rabbi. Well, you seem to have a following. People speak well of you. You have books out. People come to you for counseling, advice. Where'd you get your wisdom? Where'd you get your understanding? You know, forget the stuff about, forget how many years I spent in rabbinical school or how long, you know, I studied psychiatry. Where'd you come up? How do you know what to say to people? I mean, people that come to you for counseling or advice or therapy, your name is well known, but when you hear their problem, how do you know what to tell them? How would you describe? What is it to be a psychiatrist or a spiritual counselor? What is a psychiatrist? It's somebody that does what I do. What is it to be a spiritual leader? It's people, you see what I do? That's it. But what is it? Well, if you do it, you're one. And that's all I know. Well, I started out, I was using as a jumping off point that the arts are not a yellow circuit activity. But do you see that that which can also pass outside the world of arts is that here is something that has to be in the main, or right at the basis of it, has got to be yellow circuit activity, like a psychiatrist. Why else do they make them go to school for whatever it is, 14 years? And now, the world's greatest psychiatrist, we put him in some kind of mystical trance and ask him, what is it you do? He said, I don't know, my mouth. How did you learn it? I don't know. What does it take to be a psychiatrist? You do what I do and people say you're one? No. That cannot be allowed. But surely there's a great difference between very intelligent men and some half-baked artist that just throws paint into a fan and it blows on a wall and he cuts it out of the sheetrock and says, here it is, and somebody pays $50,000. You know, that's that New York idiocy. That's those nuts in the art world. I mean, there's a great difference between that and some philosopher, some spiritual leader. There's a great deal of difference, right? You betcha. Of a little more, perhaps individual, practical matter, since some of you are beginning to be able to look, feel, and think about yourself spasmodically at least, in a biochemical sense. The undertaking of this, still assuming that everyone belongs here, in some way life has pushed you up into this, it is a continuing series of biochemical shifts. Of course, it is the basis of all mystical experience that you have read about, that you've heard about, and people that have described it in numerous ways of talking to guides, whether they attribute it to drugs that put them in touch with guides, or whether it's through their own great efforts, or whether just because the guides fortuitously selected them. And they had these indescribable experiences that seemed to undeniably affect them the rest of their life, and it seemed to, in many cases, give them the ability to affect other people in some way. It is a biochemical change that was not ordinary for that person at that time, at that place. Everybody pursuing this, you're going through a series of biochemical changes. I talk about activating the nervous system, the brain itself. Unless I change directions again, in a short while I was going to expand a bit more besides the blood and the nervous system. I just don't want to drag everything down to becoming too much of a mouthful of terminology, because the experience of feeling it is it, but you go through what amounts to a predictable set of biochemical changes. How about all of the rules that all the religions have throughout the world in common? How about all the rules that the would-be mystical systems, somewhat outside the realm of the ordinary religions, how much they have in common? Well, how about the religions? They all talk about something having to do with love throughout the world, that's got to be, if you're going to serve our gods, if you're going to make the universe happy, if you're going to get in touch with the great spirits that will help feed this hunger that you have, that we all have, they always talk about something about love. What are we talking about? What are they talking about? Well, you know, let's get past the point of good old lust, as great as that is, and sex. Let's assume that all of you, to ever get attracted to this, already had the wired up potential to experience something, even if it was fairly crude. But at times you seem to just feel overwhelmed by, I just use ordinary terminology, a kind of compassion for the downtrodden of the world. People, you sit around and begin to feel very depressed yourself, and then suddenly it come to you that people are starving to death, and here I am 40 pounds overweight. And I'm depressed, and I don't even know why. Well, I think part of the reason is I'm overweight. There are people that'd be delighted to be overweight. There are people that's going to die within the next 15 seconds from not having enough to eat. And you feel something people call compassion. You feel overcome with pity, sorrow, all sorts of things. And you may feel as though this is bringing me closer to some kind of spiritual realization. I ought to pursue this. All right? But forget all ideas that the gods are speaking to me. That is a biochemical change in you. All religions have that in common, that there is some kind of biochemical change that no matter how, or what society, what culture, what language was trying to describe this so-called love, somebody, some group of bodies in that culture had an experience. Individually, collectively, it was close enough they could talk to one another, or one person seemed to have it, and then he seemed to have collected up a band of followers, and they seemed to have been able to have it enough that they knew what he meant, and they'd always call it love. They're talking about a biochemical shift that was, they could have called it pleasurable, because every time you've had it, it seemed to be pleasurable to you, but it is profitable to life. Which is not the reason you can't start out doing that. It's to please yourself is why you're here. That's the way it appears to be. You know, you can find out the other shocks later on by yourself. But that's the way it's supposed to be. Before I got here, I fooled with drugs. Or I found some swami and we used to whirl in circles and would throw up. And then he'd put a green sack over our head and he would blow in my ear and he would hum a song. Oh, we're not laughing. I enjoyed it. The story was, of course, that in some way was putting you closer to the guides. Or whatever the story was. It was enjoyable, or you wouldn't have done it. It was a pleasurable molecular change in you. All the religions have these things in common that have been, to some degree, shared biochemical shifts in one and then some small group of people in the message of it. Forget. And what the Yellow Circuit wants to do is latch on to, well, wait a minute. Islam is a lot better religion. It is more reasonable than Christianity. And let's sit down and discuss it. I have a book here I've been working on for the last 10 years that I can logically refute most of Christianity or show you that it is logically inferior to Islam. That is life down at its crudest level struggling to grow. Because all of them, they got big enough to be a religion. It was based upon, at one time, a biochemical shift in a small group of people, and then the time and the place was right that it spread to another group of people, a larger audience, and somebody heard, forget the words, which is what Yellow Circuit can't do, it's not what I have to do. Forget the thing about, all right, God sent us here to do this. God sent me here to tell you, love your neighbor. Don't kill your neighbor, except for a real good reason. Try and love him. If you get beyond the words, which are sounds, and you go back to what some of you can see on a good clear day, that is all based upon a molecular change, that you wouldn't hear the word of God if God didn't say it out loud. You wouldn't hear the word of God unless you had functioning ears. If you were deaf and God got behind you and says, I've chosen you, you're going to get the big pickle. You're going to be it. There you'd stand. God said, you know, hey, I can't wait all day. Are you coming with me or not? Turns out God didn't know that you had bad hearing. Were it not for the molecular change, there would be no religion of any kind. There'd be no so-called mysticism. When you get beyond what seems to be the organized religions, I was going to throw in a few things, unless you had functioning ears. If you were deaf and God got behind you and says, I've chosen you, you're going to get the big pickle. You're going to be it. There you'd stand. God said, you know, hey, I can't wait all day. Are you coming with me or not? Turns out God didn't know that you had bad hearing. Were it not for the molecular change, there would be no religion of any kind. There'd be no so-called mysticism. When you get beyond what seems to be the organized religions, I was going to throw in a few things. Since I told everybody that was seriously involved with this to quit eating animals, quit eating meat of all kinds. You know, I told you it wasn't religious, but all of you knew I didn't make that up. That's been around for as long as recorded history. There's been some cult somewhere saying, you know, we're not going to eat meat, and the story ends up being the gods told us don't kill animals. Or the gods told me that certain meats were not good for you. But notice, throughout the world, just as soon as you find some group that somebody has labeled a cult, you can almost count on they're going to be against eating meat. Of course, they always got a religious story for it. I've told you there is a biochemical reason for it. But the thing is, as I told you, if it had gone along, and assuming that you were properly dragged here to me and this, and that we both lived long enough, and you made a kind of appropriate, speedy progress along your own lines. The thing is, biochemically, you start going through a kind of series of plateaus where there is a temporary kind of stable floor that you keep moving. But you would have gotten to one very soon, you would have lost your taste for eating meat. Biochemically. The voice of God would not have come down some night to you and said, son, you have made, or daughter, you have made such great progress. I am so proud of you. I want to tell you, you're too fine a person to eat dead flesh. Not if you'd hung around me, that wouldn't have what happened. Biochemically, the red circuit would have sent you the message, and it wouldn't have come out up here in the yellow circuit of, son or daughter, can you hear me? This is God. See, that's part of the efforts that I have spent on you people, so to get you past that, because I'll kill you. Speaking in isolated terms, artificial terms, your red circuit would have told you, you would have just suddenly, as it were, lost interest in eating meat. You would have done it. That's why it is so common all over the world. You would have found out, since I say there can't be a constant consumption of alcohol or drugs, recreational drugs. It's not for religious or moral reasons. Everybody else says it is. That's the way it has to be in life. That's the way things get done out in life up until now. Or else they say, oh, it's just deadly to the psychological aspect of man. That's the best life can say. Given, again, that you're in the right place here with me in this activity, and given that we had enough time, and given that you made enough effort, shortly you would have come to a biochemical understanding that, hey, as much fun as I seem to have drinking sometimes, as much of the habit as I'm in doing it, I can't do it. It's not an argument, it's not a debate, because when there's a biochemical change in you, that's when you can do what other people can't do, but you can't take credit for it. How in the world can you just suddenly quit drinking? How in the world could you simply fast for 3 weeks? How in the world could you do so-and-so? Because if you do something like that, nobody's supposed to know it, including you. But when there is a biochemical change, to quit eating meat, to quit drinking, it's not any kind of struggle. It's based upon understanding. But that's not a yellow circuit phenomenon. It's not a spiritual phenomenon. Understanding is a shift in the biochemical makeup of the individual on a rather permanent basis. That there has been another stable floor, a temporary stable floor. I hate to keep saying plateaus. I don't make it sound like Sunday school or something. But your understanding, your biochemical makeup continues to shift. And part of what you used to do, part of the ways in which you used to create, apparently, or used to involve yourself with creating biochemical changes in you through drinking, through drugs, through hostility, through anger, through laziness, you can't do it anymore. It is not pleasurable, to give it a charitable, understated description. You simply can't do it. But then you can't take credit for it. That is, in a sense of, well, I decided to do this on moral grounds. I decided to do this on philosophical grounds. I decided to do this because of a spiritual decision I've made. You know that's a lie. Well, you know it's a lie because you understand it in another dimension. You understand that that's what somebody else would say, but that's not it. It is no longer biochemically pleasurable for you. It is no longer biochemically profitable to you. You can no longer tolerate it biochemically. It was not, in the ordinary binary sense, it was not an act of willpower for me to suddenly quit drinking, for me to absolutely abandon red meat. For me, one day I got up and I decided hostility is going to kill me. All my life I have been a smart ass. I've been the kind of person that would just push people, emotionally and verbally. And if that didn't do it, I don't mind taking a swing at somebody. Don't fuck with me. I can't do it anymore. But I didn't decide not to. Not in the sense that other people call it. I can't do it anymore. It is like a form, what does they give drunks, alcoholics, and abuse? There used to be something that they gave to people that supposedly had drinking problems, that if they took this pill and then they tried to drink, it was like the Titanic went down again. They would, supposedly it would floor people, that you wouldn't do that. If you took that pill and you took a drink, you only did it once. You gave up one or the other after that. That was your last drink, or else you took those pills and you went. All right, in a sense, you start creating your own anabuse, if that was what it was called, something like that. But that is what it amounts to. And I don't mean just in what appears to be very physical aspects, like alcohol or eating certain foods. That which seems to be unique to man's head, which is not, but that which seems to be unique to man's head, his attitudes, his feelings. The same way as you giving up, without any choice really, to give up alcohol, to give up drugs, is you have to give up hostility. Not so that you'll be a good Christian or a good Jew or a good Catholic, not to please your mother or father, not to please God. is it makes you sick to do it. Biochemically speaking, not spiritually speaking. But that's the way it comes out in people. All of you are aware of that. Throughout history, they've been writing that some man or woman that claims they've been trying to pursue the face of God. And then they kept getting in situations they'd get mad at somebody that mistreated them or spoke against them. And they felt, you know, they write in their diaries. For thousands of years, this has been part of life's body. I had been fasting. I had been praying 12 hours a day. And then one of the brothers of my lodge or one of the sisters came in and dropped a pitcher and broke my concentration. Plus, it was my pitcher that I had made. And suddenly the wrath of the evil spirits overcame me. And I blew 2 months worth of praying and fasting just like that. And it wasn't her fault. It was my fault. And God condemned me. I felt terrible. I decided then I'm going to fast for 3 months. I'm going to go lock myself in a closet away from everybody. That's their description. And it's not that in some way that's imagination. Remember, there's no such thing as imagination. I mean, the only thing close to imagination is those that say that some's their imagination. There is no such thing. There is the less than complete understanding of something. What they're describing is simply a biochemical effect. And what life has told me or showed me or made me do all this is you can bypass all that. It's just more efficient, to say the very least. I can't give you a sales pitch. I never have, and I assume you're not waiting for it now. And it's not just that it's more efficient. I didn't have any choice, and some of you got no choice. But more efficient is one way to put it. It's a lot more enjoyable. And by efficient, I don't mean in just some very mundane, pragmatic sense, is you understand so much more. Because it's not that the gods told me, don't get angry. The gods, according to humanity, according to what life has had humans saying, the gods have been telling humans, don't be mad and kill each other for what? 3,000 or 4,000 years at least. Because the gods said so. Because the gods said, we didn't intend you to do that. Of course, then you got to cut off the yellow circuit and say, well, why in the hell did you make us like this? That's when you get into the swamp. The thing is that for the few people that life has always been working through in a certain way, it becomes biochemically almost impossible. Take a range of words I've already given you. Unprofitable, unpleasant, sickening, but not spiritually, not because the God said so, is that you have altered. It has been altered in you. Somewhere in between for the time being. Your biochemical media condition that you have shifted in an almost permanent manner in some small way, albeit in the beginning. But to the point that I now, it's not that I can't become angry anymore, but it's like taking antabuse and then taking a drink. It is like my system, from the top here through all circuits, speaking of hormones, blood, enzymes, it's as though somebody took me and went, I can't. There's nothing to say except, but what you understand from that, because you're not involved with life's older, less enlightening stories of gods and demons and etc. I was going to talk to you about how it is here in this little room, the room of this planet, that based upon the known laws of physics, apparently everything is simply recycled, and that can't be. It's going to wear out, right? I think I'll leave that. I've got two tasks. One of them shouldn't even call it a task. One is a super duper task. Yeah, we're going to cut it. A few people get this on tape. We're going to put a few blank seconds, and then the tape, I'll come back with the task after this brief pause from our sponsor. Just cover the lens. Okay. Still rolling it. Take it off.
Well, try and get a few seconds on it. Okay.
Everything's still rolling? All right, the task. One of them. Now, I'll make it one because I didn't go back to this tonight. I meant to. So I'll just give the super duper task. I want everybody, we've been through variations of this, but not enough of you can remember this. I want you to do something personally, biochemically pleasurable. There's hardly any of you in here that have a continuing awareness of this. Some of you have it when I joke with you, when we get together and I prod you about making plans. Life was not made for those involved with this to suffer. And I told everybody that in the beginning, and you thought it was some kind of theoretical comment I was making, or it was going to be the heart of some dogma I was coming up with. But you were not made to suffer, not in the sense of everybody else. Not through some divine spiritual plan, but if you continue this and you make and experience these kind of biochemical changes, you can't suffer. You understand why the word suffering is not right. You can't do it. Again, it's like taking alcohol when you had antabuse pills. But hardly any of you have a continuing awareness that you should be not only aware of that, but you should be trying to do something which is personally pleasurable to you. But understand that it's going to be biochemical. That's why I bring it up again. I want to stress that. Too many of you are still tied too much to the floor of life. That is, a feeling despondent, or else feeling almost terminally bored, having the blahs, feeling like nobody loves you. You look so forward to our weekly get-togethers that seems to give you a spurt of energy, and then you go back and you do your job, and you go home. Nobody wants to have sex with you, or those that do want to have sex with you and then leave right quick. You're just bored. You don't know what's going to happen. You keep waiting for me to come up with some gigantic plan and us to buy, you know, a big island with a hotel and start something, or me to fly you to another planet. All of you should be, I want you to do something. I want you to find something that is personally pleasurable to you biochemically, which that's all it always is, but I want you this time to keep that in mind. And you can do part of it with plans. But you cannot continue this. You're going to find it out. Just like I said, if I had left you alone after a certain change in your condition, you would have given up alcohol and drugs and meat. I just speed up the process. Do something. All of you have got something that just the planning of it, the thinking of it, gives you pleasure. But forget about, all right, well, this is something, it's psychological in my past. I keep dreaming about doing so-and-so. I keep dreaming about buying a new sports car. I keep dreaming about going to school and taking up painting or architecture. And I know I can't do it. I can't afford it. I don't really have the interest. It's my imagination. I remember I used to try to draw when I was a kid because my older brother could always beat me up. And since he was stronger, I used to play like, well, I got talent. I don't have to do that. It's some kind of psychological thing. I couldn't do it. I don't deserve to do it. Plus, I'm too tired. You're really hurting yourself. I mean, really hurting yourself. You should pursue something. I don't care if it is to buy a damn Corvette. And there's people in here, out in life there are people. You know, they're oftentimes attacked by would-be mystics and would-be spiritual people are saying, here's the people living a life of materialism. Ha! Boy, aren't they miserable. I mean, sure, they buy a new Corvette or a new Ferrari every year. Sure, they've worked their ass off and got this old yacht, but hell, they're not as happy as me. I'm a spiritual dude. You know, I got a 49 Volkswagen. And I stay home and watch Lent gather in the corner and sometimes watch TV. But I'm spiritual. I can tell I'm spiritual because, you know, I don't have much fun, so I know I'm spiritual. If it comes down, it's quite possible. I'm not being funny at all. At some of you, that would be very pleasurable. You got to understand the cost, but now, from our talks recently and tonight, to go out and to go $30,000 in debt for a Corvette, understand the cost. Go out and plan a little bit. Drive them around, test drive them, borrow somebody's, drive it, the fun of it, the biochemical, the actual fun, if that's what you want of having it. But then figure on $30,000 for what? You know, how long is it going to last? I'm not bad-mouthing it. If you buy it and you're happy forever, I couldn't be more delighted. Don't wait for me to attack you. But there is one thing about possessions, that they seem to have a half-life that is shorter than your life, to say the very least. Whatever it is. You people should be doing something pleasurable. And I picked, at least at one extreme, a pretty extreme example. That is, of just material something. There's nothing wrong with it. But insofar as it costing you a great deal of money or effort, all of you have got things that personally give you biochemical pleasure that you don't do faithfully. I don't give too many hints, but I will give up resisting myself. There are things that apparently would be jobs and tasks that people, you know, like cleaning up your desk, like washing your car once a week, like cleaning up the house when you know it should be, instead of waiting for a woman to do it or the other person in your house to do it, to do your taxes early. Things that at first you might think is insane, but think how good it feels when you get your taxes done every year and you wait until the last day and you feel good. Now, if we're going to speak psychologically with areas like this, a psychologist, an ordinary person, could say, all right, it is the joy of getting through something that you dreaded. Sounds fine, but they left out the point. If you have pleasure in it, getting through with it, it is a biochemical pleasure, and it was pleasurable. Why wait until April the 13th or the 14th? Do it now. And then think how happy, because all your life you wait until the last day, and this time you did it before January was out. So what? You only felt good 15 minutes that you were aware of getting all done, wrapping it up, or taking it to an accountant and say, here it all is, you put it in the right form and mail it in for me. What people don't ordinarily realize also is that, let's say 15 minutes you could tell, hey, that's true. I did this job I dreaded, and I went ahead and did it beforehand. Just sit down and did it. Didn't go in through these biochemical plans that seem to create a negative shift in me, that is, of dreading it, putting it off. Then having myself condemn myself that, wait a minute, it's due tomorrow. Or for me to continually think every month, all right, now it's February the 15th. Now it's March the 15th and I haven't done it. That has a negative, an unpleasurable biochemical shift in you. It's not only the pleasure of doing it, but then you don't notice, all right? I cleaned up, I've been putting off getting the leaves off the house for 2 months. I got and did it. It was 30 minutes, I got over it, and I did feel good when I got through it. It was fun. I'm glad I did it. And you can discount, so I had maybe, don't count actual job. I got through and I sit down, I looked, and it was like, phew, boy, I'm glad that's over. I knew I had to do it, and I just kept putting it off. And I observed that I felt maybe a shift in me. I felt good for 10 minutes. But what you don't notice is then, beyond that, what did you do later in the day? How did you feel? How did you feel the next morning? You should be doing that which gives you personal pleasure biochemically. You should be just as, if you want to put it crudely, from a spiritual, would-be spiritual sense, you should be just as selfish toward doing this to you as possible. Because anything less than this, you're dragging your feet. You're keeping down the speed at which you can change the kind of stable floor wherein you shift your biochemical condition, your general condition, to wherein you are not, from one year to the next, you're not biochemically the same person. If you're not actively pursuing that, and you're like a business, if you're not growing, to some degree you're dying. I'll give the other task next week if I get around to talking about it. One other little small thing. Especially you newer people and people getting this on tape. I know some of you want to write me, some of you do drop me notes, and some of the notes are on the basis. Some of you get a glancing awareness of it and some of you don't. the senses of trying to impress me, and take this outside the realm of spirituality and everything else, it is biochemical. When there seems to be somebody leading the pack, everybody in the pack goes through some degree wanting to impress the head wolf. At least get to the point that he ain't going to pick on me. He won't run me off. I'll show that I submit. I'll show that, hey, I submit and you're in charge and you can't do any wrong. But let me show you one little trick I got. Let me show you one little talent I have. I read everything that's handed into me here. I read everything that people send me. But insofar as trying to impress me, just in an ordinary sense, try and see what that is. I brought it out in the open for you. For one thing, and you got to listen through real biochemical, extraordinary ears. I can't be impressed. And that's not anything bragging on me, but there's nothing you can do to impress me other than begin to activate your own nervous system. When I see that I got paid back from some of this, it impresses me. But insofar as impressing me about you individually, try and hear what I'm said. Try to get past the point of worrying about impressing me. If you're here, I'm impressed. As much as I can be. I mean, you've impressed me more than my family, my own children. If you start hearing some of this on your own, I'm impressed. But as far as trying to impress me, you ought to forget it. The person that knows more than anybody in the world that I know is me. And I don't impress me. So try and get over it. If you're here, I like you. And as I said, in a sense, I'm impressed that you're here. It's almost unbelievable. But as far as this thing that, I don't know you well enough, some of you here, and especially you people in other cities, that, if I just knew you and knew the kind of talent and what you could do, some particular ability or talent you have, or how much of what I've been saying thus far you believe you understand, that you thought about it before, if you are interested in this, I'm impressed. But that's on a certain level. But feeling like you need to impress me or want to impress me personally, you can't. Just remember what I said. I told you the truth. I don't impress me. So I don't know what chance you think you got. Give it up.